today we're going to be speaking about psychedelic preparedness. And I thought we'd take a kind of what, why, how approach. So what is psychedelic preparedness? How can we measure it? Why is it important? Is it predictive of certain acute states of the psychedelic experience as well as potential outcomes? And how? How can we measure it? How can we optimize it? And how can we maybe manipulate it and create interventions for people to do before going into psychedelic experiences? Does that work? Okay, so the need to prepare. The concept of set and setting have largely been spoken about by researchers since the 1960s. But this concept of preparedness is a relatively new Western construct. Traditionally, for example, in the context of indigenous communities using plant medicines, many aspects of what we might call preparedness often occur by default. They're woven into the fabric of their culture and therefore into the day-to-day. The community itself acts as a container. However, for individuals taking high doses of psychedelics outside of these kind of unique cultural contexts, there's an active need to make time and space for adequate preparation before going into these sessions. And this need to prepare, I need to prepare. Is that working? Anyway, this need to prepare can be seen across various different cultures, whether it's more recreational users, kind of asking the community, how can I best prepare for my first ever psychedelic experience? And we can often see these, if you could see my slides, various questions asked on Reddit. What's the best way to prepare? How can I prepare? There's hundreds and hundreds of hits. But we can also see it in the more ceremonial use. So there's thousands of retreat centers now across the world, mainly across kind of South America and Europe. And before going to one of these plant medicine or psychedelic retreats, more often than not, you'll be given a PDF document listing the various do's and don'ts to do before going into the psychedelic experience, some stricter than others. And this is obviously important. There's not necessarily a standardized way of doing things. However, there is a need to prepare. And by preparing for these experiences, essentially, we're hoping to increase the likelihood of having a safe, meaningful, and maybe transformative experience and reduce the risks involved and reduce the challenging experiences. I wish I had my slides, but I guess I prepared too much. Woohoo! There's Reddit. There's the retreats. Here are some reasons. So we can kind of liken, to a certain extent, this need to prepare with taking a day trip to Paris. Both these kind of experiences may be transformative. By preparing for these experiences, it can kind of make all the difference in terms of how much we enjoy them, how safe they are, and how meaningful they can be. So just as we would pack our bags, prepare some euros, find out the best transportation routes, maybe map out a route, we'd kind of want to do the similar thing for a psychedelic experience. So researching the subject, researching the substance, setting intentions, and creating a safe and comfortable environment to do these experiences in. And yes, it's true. Sometimes, even without any preparation, you may have a completely transformative experience. However, the risks are still there. And by preparing for these experiences, just as if you were going to Paris, you may, if you don't prepare, you would miss out on certain routes, or you may miss something exciting, or you may get lost in the city. We'd also want to provide people with the tools to not miss out on certain experiences, to find their way, to provide some kind of navigation before going in. And so on one hand, by preparing for the psychedelic experience, we can try to mitigate any psychological and physical negative effects, as well as starting to increase the idea of providing participants or individuals with a sort of informed consent. They know what to expect from the experience as they go into it. And on the other hand, we can try and increase the positive aspects of the experience and try to make the most of these weird and interesting experiences as best as we can. So there's clearly a lot of talk around psychedelics. And with this talk, there comes a growing provision of needs. So there's lots and lots of blogs and media posts kind of expressing different ways in which people can prepare. And these aren't necessarily bad. They kind of all say the same thing. Set intentions, maybe try meditation, clean your room, find some nice music, make sure you know what you're going to take. But the problem is they're not standardized and they're not research-based. And this may not be what everyone's looking for, but the problem becomes apparent when we move beyond the kind of recreational and retreat settings and into the research and clinical field, where there is a need for kind of standardized research-based interventions. So in the context of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapies, we see this explicitly mentioned preparation phase. And in this phase, the participant will work with the therapist to speak about what they may expect from the experience, speak about some psychoeducation, and most importantly, build some kind of, they'll cultivate a therapeutic alliance with the person or the people they're going to be doing their experience with. However, these often non-standardized sessions aren't necessarily well documented. They're not kind of described in a lot of detail in lots of the protocols, and more importantly, there's a massive variety between different trials. And so this is a really nice opportunity to kind of dig deeper into this state and work out what's happening, what are people currently doing, how are they reporting them, and how can we optimize this state using various kind of avenues and directions of research. So despite the kind of variety that's going on in these sessions, we define psychedelic preparedness as a state, I cannot read that, a state preceding the psychedelic session that is conducive to a safe and personally meaningful experience. And this state will allow the participant to be psychologically, physically, and socially ready for both the content and consequence of the experience, and it will most likely involve a variety of extra pharmacological factors. And so when cultivating this state of psychedelic preparedness, when approaching it kind of from these different avenues, our research team wanted to do a bit more than just define it. We wanted to eventually look towards developing some kind of intervention. After kind of testing whether or not it is actually a thing, we want to see how can we best cultivate this state. So the gap in research is there isn't a measure that currently is out there to test it. So we wanted to develop and validate a measure of this state of psychedelic preparedness, work out what it is, and see whether we can test it. And then moving on from that, develop an intervention to manipulate it or optimize it. And a large part of our research, I just wanted to say loads of the artwork in here is by Harry Pack, who's got lots of art going on in the exhibition, and they're really cool. So this was supposed to represent co-production. I'm not really sure why, but you can work it out. So we wanted to include the idea of co-production and PPI, so participant public involvement. And in the context of science, PPI is the idea of doing research with or research by public and participants rather than to or at or for. So a large part of our research design has been including lived experience voices. And then another part has been, so if we call these participants experts by experience, we also would include experts from a large variety of different disciplines. So not just looking at psychiatry, but also psychology, philosophy, etc. So this has been a kind of underlying active ingredient, if you will. So I'm going to take you through some of the findings from a couple of our studies looking into psychedelic preparedness. And the first one was this development of the Psychedelic Preparedness Scale. And the aim of this first study was to essentially generate a large pool of items that could eventually be fed into the kind of more refining and validating stages. So this study consisted of 3 stages, and the thing's broken again. Okay, so the first stage was, if we can click. Okay, first stage involved preliminary consultations with experts in the field, so psychiatrists, philosophers, and psychologists, to generate this big item pool. We wanted to generate lots of items which could capture this idea of psychedelic preparedness. So individual items that would be included in a questionnaire. And the aim was to develop as many as possible, which would then be refined and validated. So we spoke with 8 different consultants, and there was either single or double feedback sessions where we tried to generate as many items as possible. The next stage was, after we developed, I think it was 59 items, we fed them into the second round, the second phase, which is called a Delphi mixed with a Delphi method, which is essentially Delphi rounds, which is commonly used when you're attempting to reach consensus on certain items. But we called it Delphi because we interspersed it with focus groups. So the Delphi rounds essentially are, again, getting feedback from experts, a different group of experts, but in between getting feedback from experts, we ran focus groups with participants who had previously been involved in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy trials. And these were online focus groups, so we had participants across the world. There's the preliminary consultations, and this is the diagram of the Delphi. So you can see each of these rounds, the aim was to reach consensus. So these experts, they could vote whether they strongly agree we should include the item or strongly disagree we should not include the item. And the aim is reaching majority consensus. So you can see the items started at 59, then they kind of ramped up to 88, back down to 60, and then by round 4, we settled on 51. And the experts by experience seem to be happy with this item pool. And then finally, with these questions, we then pre-tested them. So with another group of lived experience participants who had participated in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, essentially they went through each of the questions and they did like the speak out loud process. So we made modifications to word choice and grammar just so they could, so the questions we were asking what we thought they were asking, if they were readable and acceptable, etc. So at the end of this, we had 51 items. And the next study, we wanted to psychometrically validate them. So this is kind of standard procedure when developing a new scale or measure. And so we used a large sample of participants, over 1,000, and we administered these questions to 2 samples. The first sample was just over 500 participants with the aim of running an exploratory factor analysis, which is essentially the idea we have a large number of data points, these 51 items, and we want to look at the underlying structure within them. And from this, we can kind of group them into what we call factors or latent variables, which supposedly could be meaningful based on the items included. And importantly, in this phase, every item could be kind of grouped or clustered onto any of these factors. That's why it's called exploratory. We didn't kind of impose a certain model on it. It generates something from within. And we can also reduce the number of items by doing this process. And the thing's broken. But from this exploratory factor analysis, essentially it showed that there are possibly 4 underlying constructs. And these were based on the ways in which these items kind of loaded onto them. They were called knowledge, we called them knowledge, what did we call them? Knowledge expectation. So these are the items kind of tying into the idea of psychoeducation and realistic expectations of what would be coming. I'm going to say intention preparation. So these were more active ways of setting intentions and engaging in practices such as, I participated in certain practices to prepare for the experience, whether that's meditation, breathwork, journaling, etc. Safety and support. So did they feel the substance would be safe to take? And had they made adequate plans for the safety of that environment, as well as what to do after the experience? And finally, which I definitely know because I've done this so many times and it's broken again, was another one, which will soon become clear. I honestly can't believe I've forgotten it, how many times I've worked with this. So these 4 constructs, which I will display the items in a second, and you can get an idea of what loads onto each of them. So once we've done the exploratory one, which kind of came up with these items, we then run it in another big sample, and this time we run a confirmatory factor analysis, which is a similar process, but this time you say, this is the model I've come up with, and I now want to impose it on this new large data set and see if they fit well. And there's various kind of stats you can look at to see if it fits well. And it fitted well. So we kind of stuck with that model. And I wish I could show you some of the items. I'm not sure why it's not working.
Maybe you could manually at there, just open up the PowerPoint and move to the slide. The file didn't corrupt it, so you can freeze it.
Oh no. Did I corrupt it?
Just testing it.
This is so bad. I really should have prepared more. Okay, so we have these items, and long story short, we run the EFA, the CFA on these large sample sizes, and it reduces down to these 20 items into these 4 different components. I wish I could show you them. I'm sure I will in a second. But we also, it's important when doing these kind of factor analyses, yes, we can break it into these 4 different components, which I really want to show you, and you will see them eventually. But more importantly, it also fits well as a structure as a whole. So we can say these items make up a concept of what we can define as psychedelic preparedness, but for the sake of kind of breaking it down into its constituent parts, you can also see it as these 4 different components. And so having kind of developed and validated this scale and kind of shown that, okay, this is a thing, this seems to have good fit, the next thing we wanted to do was test it for validity and reliability. And there's various different kind of slightly boring tasks we can do to test for that, whether it's convergent, divergent, discriminant. It had good validity and it had good reliability in that it had good internal consistency as well as test retest. So when the participants did the survey again 2 weeks later, they scored very similar results. The next exciting thing to look at is, okay, but what does it mean? Is it predictive of anything? What does it correlate with? So we wanted to see in this first sample whether using the retrospective version of the scale, so that's when they kind of look back at how prepared they were. I did this, I felt this, I trusted the substance, I trusted the environment, I made a plan, etc. Whether that was predictive of not only aspects of the acute psychedelic experience, so mystical experience using the mystical experience questionnaire, challenging experience and emotional breakthrough, but also whether it predicted changes as a result or a therapeutic-ish outcome of the experience. And we found that it did. So there was a positive and pretty strong correlation with aspects which we would describe as good for the psychedelic experience, so emotional breakthrough and mystical experience, and it negatively predicted the challengingness of the experience. And likewise, it predicted change in well-being after the experience, as well as how the impact people ascribed to the experience, how much it impacted their life, and how central it became as kind of a life story. So that was good news. We thought, okay, there's a positive correlation. And the next thing we wanted to do was split the groups between high and low preparers. Preparers? Yes, those who had high and low preparation. And again, we could see a significant difference in these same outcomes between those in the high preparation group and the low preparation group. And there could be some nice slides, but maybe we won't visualize them. You can imagine the correlations going like this and the groups looking like this. Perfect. Yes, maybe it will work. Okay, go. Oh, back. This is what one did I missed out psychophysical readiness, probably one of the most important ones. It's slightly blurry, but we can kind of get an idea of which items load onto different ones. So if we start with knowledge expectations, so if we look at the second to last one, I understood that the experience could evoke a range of intense emotions from bliss to horror. And there's the variety of different items loading onto the different ones. Psychophysical readiness, you can see there's questions tapping into not only I felt psychologically prepared for the experience, but often something which is slightly missed from aspects of preparation is this idea of the physical readiness for the experience. They can be very physical experiences, so I felt physically prepared for the experience. Intention preparation, for example, I had carefully contemplated my reasons for taking a psychedelic substance. And finally, if we look at one from support and planning, I felt the substance would be safe to take, or I felt a trusting, positive connection with the people who were going to be around me during the experience. And so there's a real range. And I think it's important to mention that this list, there may be things when you look at this list, things that pop out, why haven't they included this? This seems to be something that's missing. This is the process that kind of came from the consensus process, from the Delphi, using the expert opinion, using the experts by experience opinion to reduce it down to this list. And I think when it comes to a consensus building approach, there's never going to be consensus among 1,000%, 100% of people. So this was the list that had good validity, good reliability. And one of our participants from the lived experience group did say it would be really nice. I don't know if this exists in any scale possible, but they really enjoyed coming up with the process, coming up with the items. And they said it would be really cool if there was a scale where after you've completed it, you could always give feedback, if there was a continuous process of including those lived experience perspectives. And we haven't included that yet, but it's still on the back of my mind. And it would be nice to kind of have, if not all the time, but like a continuous iterative process of including multiple perspectives. So there's some examples. Okay, perfect. Here are some correlations. And as you can see, like I said, just as you imagined, the ups and the downs. Top row, acute experience measures. Bottom row, kind of changes as a result of the experience. And these lovely violin plots, you can see the group differences between high and low preparation. I won't go into too much detail about the measures. But yeah, top row acute experience, bottom row outcomes. Oh my gosh, it works. And so the second study, the first study was using an online sample and it was retrospective. So anyone who had taken a psychedelic experience, we asked them to speak about their most significant psychedelic experience. But for the second one, we wanted to check the, perfect, 5 minutes, the prospective value. So can we use this measure before going into a psychedelic experience rather than just relying on memory? So we partnered with some collaborating retreat centers, and participants took the survey before going into their 5 to 7 days psilocybin retreat. And we found very similar results. So not only did it show good validity and reliability again, but it was also showed correlations with, the first one is, you can't really see it, but it's the Altered States of Consciousness questionnaire. So essentially a positive correlation between kind of altered state, intensity of the altered state. And these are changes in depression, anxiety, and stress. So they took the depression, anxiety, and stress scores before and after. And so therefore we could get a change score. And we could see there was a negative correlation between them. And here we can see the group differences. So this is also using the Altered States of Consciousness questionnaire. And in a way, for the items we kind of associate with a good psychedelic experience, so things like experience of unity, spiritual experience, blissful state, they were higher in the high preparation group. And those aspects we would expect to be bad or less desirable, such as anxiety, were lower in the high preparation group. And the same thing you can see in the larger group differences. So the final thing we've done is, again, with our collaborating retreat centers, try to work out, rather than just looking at quant stuff, really look into what aspects of preparation people find the most useful. Why do they find it useful, and what would they kind of recommend to other people going into these experiences? So we ran 20 qualitative interviews with participants who had been to one of these retreats, asking what did you find useful, most useful, and why, and what would you recommend? And meditation came up as one of the most important parts. And I'll quickly flick through this. When asked to kind of unpack why meditation was most helpful, you can see meditation kind of helped. This is only a small kind of subset of what they were saying, but not only did meditation provide participants with the tools to kind of provide them with tools that they could use during the experience if things did start to get a little bit rocky, for example, grounding techniques and calming the mind, but we also realized through our conversations, it kind of allowed participants to start the opening up process before going into the psychedelic experience. And this may not be surprising because there's been a lot of research looking at kind of the similarities between meditation and psychedelics. But the problem is no research has specifically looked at the pre-psychedelic experience and how we might be able to use meditation as part of this psychedelic preparedness training to kind of, like I said before, provide participants with the tools for the experience, but start this expanding process before going in, which may be very therapeutic, if not interesting. So our next steps are we're collaborating with the Harvard Meditation Research Program to develop a meditation-based psychedelic preparation intervention. So using the factors that we derived from the original research and framing it in a meditation context to see whether we can, whether training in this fashion will have an impact on the acute psychedelic experience, as well as changes after the experience. I could speak more about that, but I realize I've completely run out of time. 1 minute. So conclusions, what is psychedelic preparedness? That is. Why is it important? That's why. And how can we optimize it? I don't know.